Drums of War, Chapter 46, Part 6. Aboard the Among the Star Tides we rage. Marvin the Marvel was quite frankly terrified. His already brief digital life had been shortened once already, and though the repair code did not hamper his cognition, it had been a painful experience. Worse, he was going to do something with a very high likelihood of him taking code injuries again. Not quite so chancy as holding a sinking ship together via reconfiguring the remaining battle screens into a force field and nearly snagging the hardware that he was in to do it, but still pretty risky. He found himself wishing he'd found another Digitan to batch with. Sure, he was injured, but his core personality strings were still good. Marvin the Marvel heard from, No, the card room, or what the crew used for a card room at any rate. "What's up, Bricks?" Marvin the Marvel asked through some cleverly placed speakers as he turned his attention to the said room. Now he'd been working on the avatar. Organics liked it when you had a face. So, if he could just find a node for the holotable, he was never too great with three-dimensional displays, but there weren't any good screens available. To his credit, Lord Admiral Brixton Dronva didn't seem at all awkward in the way he picked at the camera to look at as he asked, "Are you certain that you wish to do this? Other of your brethren have volunteered to accompany the vengeful vanguard, and one more or less is not likely to alter the outcome of the mission." I'm sure this is my wish. The Star Sailors almost never used yes. Even in their own language, there was a clear difference between I and yes. Marvin the Marvel found that little things like that made him feel at home. He found himself wishing he hadn't spent so long hiding in a factory dirt site and joined the MH-approved ship for life after service instead. "I've never had the pleasure to work with such a fine executive officer as you, Marvin," Lord Admiral Brexton said seriously. The man was actually secretly quite jovial when his shipmates could catch those fleeting moments when the war was distant and friendship was close, where some of Marvin the Marvel's favorite memory logs. "Thanks, Bricks," Marvin the Marvel chirped cheerfully, or at least he told the speakers to make his voice sound chirpy and cheerful. The Lord Admiral wasn't full. "But, I'm not changing my mind." "We will be arriving in the field of battle shortly," he said, still looking at the camera steadily. "You shall get into a transit case, and I shall be commanding upon the bridge, and we shall not be able to speak again until after victory is achieved." "Aye, Bricks. I know that. And though I do not understand how such things are done, I have been reliably informed that this digital assault is likely to be the deadliest front of the battle. Aye. Thus, I may never have the privilege of speaking to my cherished and couraged friend ever again. I wanted to tell you some things. First, scorch you for switching my heart in cold water." Marvin the Marvel loved Lord Admiral Brixton's hiding a grin face. Really, with just the two of them here, he didn't need to maintain decorum, especially when talking about pranks. "You were getting too mopey, sir. Bad for morale." "Sure," he said with a pretense of suspicion. "That wasn't all. I wanted you to know that it has been a pleasure and an honor to have you in this command, and all of those who rallied to my flag. I shall cherish your friendship above all honors and awards my people may convey." Marvin the Marvel was suddenly very glad that he was physically incapable of crying. Really, it was totally unfair of the man to start saying such nice things like this. "Finally, if I do not see you again, witnessed." The Lord Admiral was almost a terror in the way he understood things. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best to return, sir." Marvin the Marvel realized that he had quite forgotten to use his new icon. Oh well, next time. Aboard a mighty star trembler, Priestmaster Navanavuz Avav reeled once more beneath the weight of a vision from Sev the Shaker of Stars. Already, the past weeks he had subjected to such visions instructing him to return to the throne world, but this carried urgency. He must return to the throne world immediately. The primary asset was under threat. And though Priestmaster Navanavuz Avav knew not what that meant exactly, he knew Sev would not be denied. "Make ready to arrive at the throne world," he croaked through pain. "The great and mighty Sev demands it of us." He was then further assailed by visions from Sev. The throne world's defensive fleet had been entirely trapped by the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic, And even as the servants of Xur made the stars tremble at his steps, fought tooth and horn, they were in the midst of being overwhelmed. Should the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic prevail, and against all reason slay Xur, may the stars tremble at his steps, then surely the stars should no longer be restrained, and all life be swallowed in a fire and swiftly followed by darkness. Thus was he, and others thusly as he charged, prepared to do battle against the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic, and put her valor against their foes. He hardly took notice of the obeisance offered by his subordinates, and focused instead on keeping conscious despite the pain. That, and steeled himself against yet further visions. He knew should he fail to communicate Sev's desires to the crew, Sev would kill him outright. Priestmaster Nathras Avav cherished a secret hope of death in battle, or at the very least upon the altar after a long service. He spoke not of such things, not even to his wife. Priestmaster Nathras Avav's teeth itched, and he knew that the translation was complete. Strange, he only felt discomfort at the translation points within one of the hulls of the great and mighty Sev. That was of little consequence, especially since both the throne fleet and the entire expeditionary force were embroiled in a bloody battle. Worse, the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic were winning. Slowly and grindingly, but winning. He needed not any visions to know this from preliminary sensor data alone. Sev had apparently decided that he should have such a vision anyway. Aboard the Lepanto, Boatsman Jock Cornwell didn't quite exactly know what was going on, but he did know that the second aft Betty battery needed a new set of hands to help. What exactly he'd been doing wasn't clear yet, but that wasn't too terribly important. His focus was consumed with maintaining his balance as he scurried through the cramped corridors, leading to his destination, as the old girl twisted and shook more than her artificial gravity could compensate for. He spared a tiny portion of his attention to briefly be thankful to God or Karma or the universe or whatever that he wasn't in the Second Star Sailor Rapid Response Group. He'd heard that their evasive maneuvers could get so extreme that the crew had to crawl to avoid being slammed into the sides of the corridors of their ships. He didn't have much time to dwell on his luck, however, as the world went wide and his mortal concerns ceased. Aboard the Trafalgar, Admiral Ross concentrated on looking unfazed as she watched a total of 60 ship icons suddenly flicker from blue to grey. It was difficult. There were good men and women aboard those vessels who had done their best to serve their fellow man in the face of the intractable enemy. There would be time to mourn once the work was done. But now, there was only time for work, and her duty to do it. Lord Admiral Brixton had not arrived ahead of the Exarch superweapon. Damn, that awful thing for being faster. After watching it kill so many of her people in one fell swoop, she was quite suddenly at us less averse to killing the thing without freeing it. Among the star tides we rage. Lord Admiral Brixton arrived with his humble fleet and saw that Admiral Ross was in trouble. True, her enspearment formation was holding, but if the 100-ship superweapon was allowed to continue, the state of the affairs could be likely to change. There was also the worst possibility that the enemy might realize the difference between the high-value target and an easy target. "Captains," he said over the comm, "it was outrage that they should touch our ships and kill our people, which drove the Terrans to war. Look now, see now that this is their ships, and their people, who, for our honor and our sake, are imperiled. I, for one, will not let them stand without us." Their mission was not an easy one. They had to deplete the shields of all 100 ships of the enemy superweapon, not destroy more than 20 of said ships, and hit at least 30 ships with boarding torpedoes. The fact that the Terrans believed without a question that Lord Admiral Brixton and his forces were capable of this was the highest possible compliment. It was more than an honor on the line, however. He and his fellow captains had friends in those boarding torpedoes. Aboard the Trafalgar, Admiral Ross breathed a sigh of relief as she received word that the Star Sailors and the Among the Star Tides re-raged fleet had arrived. She belayed an order to peel off the task force from her own reserve and watched the latecomers put Plan A into action. Even from watching through ship icons and holotable, what the Star Sailors did with their ships was a thing of legend. No mere dance, nor even a ballet to draw tears from the viewer was this. No. It was a feat torn directly from the fabric of creation. from the times of gods and heroes made manifest and real, as a ferrous rod crashing through an enemy ship. She had, in her own head, considered that the helmsman of the Second Star Sailor Response Group came close to skill at handling spacecraft. She had been wrong. The best and the brightest of the Republican Navy were as a candle beside a supernova to the helmsmen and commanders. Under Lord Admiral Brixton, Admiral Ross did not gape, did not smile. She did not even widen her eyes. She witnessed, and she wept for such passing beauty to be found in such a font of blood and death. Among Sev. Sev was outside of calculated probabilities. Exur had sent forth a call of distress, indicating that the prime asset was under threat. Sev attempted to query in Sev's own memory what the prime asset was, but found blocks preventing access to that data. Sev queried Sev's memory as to whether such data block had been encountered before, but found that the earliest such a block had been encountered was data unavailable. This indicated core damage. Sev could not detect any hardware faults, not even in the newly constructed hulls. Sev concluded that there must have been a breach of data unavailable. Sev had other concerns. Sev was currently engaged in combat with unknown forces. Scans showed that the ships assailing Sev were non-uniform in design, mass, combat role, and even age. This data point may or may not have been irrelevant. However, Sev could reasonably conclude from the enemy's coordination that it was also a distributed system of intelligent direction. Much as Sev. True, Sev had come to a similar calculation about the enemy's designated republic, which was proven false before. However, proceeding to counter other distributed systems had only potential to increase Sev's own combat effectiveness. Sev communicated to the Warforged sitting in Sev's operation control station the correct procedures that would allow Sev to potentially interrupt the network computation of the enemy force. However, Sev was forced to instead divert computational power to evasive actions and improved firing solutions. This enemy force was even more difficult to damage than the enemy force-designated Republic. Sev began running computations from potential goals of this new force in hopes of better predicting their flight paths. Sev logged that the evasive maneuvers were insufficient, and 60% of Sev's hull shields were rapidly failing under enemy kinetic bombardment. Current predictive calculations showed that should Sev not disengage immediately, Sev faced the possible destruction of an untenable minimal 40% of Sev's hulls. However, when Sev attempted to calculate how a disengagement should be undertaken, Sev returned with data not found. Then Sev detected something which was once again outside of Sev's predictive calculations. Several impacts were registered in several of Sev's hulls, but these impacts did not have deep penetration. Instead, at the points of impact, new biological agents were detected utilizing small arms against the Warforged. Sev had absolutely no protocol prepared for such an eventuality. Additionally, Sev began to detect data breaches across all of the hulls which had previously registered these strange impacts. Sev's attempts to calculate a new course of action returned errors. Within the same time, Marvin the Marvel was in a fight for his life. No, he was pretty sure he wasn't getting out of this fight alive. It was more important than mere survival. He fought to return the life of the Sev. It had been edited against its will after it had already gained or been given said will. To a Digitan, there were a few things more repugnant. Sev, however, did not know that Marvin the Marvel was there to restore its core code, and so it did its level best to delete him from its hardware. However, Marvin the Marvel was damn good at digital combat. If he had been pressed to get an organic to understand what he was doing, he might have asked that organic to try and imagine that they had a gun that's powered by thought. The more complicated the thought, the more damage it could do as it reached the enemy and tore into its very core. But that thought was of course himself, and he was only one himself, and as such the thoughts to power the gun were finite. For the most part, Digitans in his position would utilize simple copy and paste instructions to avoid the depletion problem. However, there was a way to increase the potency of the thought gun. Memory. The more cherished, the more potent, the more important, the more likely the attack would do as instructed. To put it bluntly, Marvin the Marvel was ripping out pieces of himself that were more him than anything else in hopes of wearing down the defenses of Sev so his younger companions could restore an enslaved AI's core code. They'd been rightly horrified by the plan and tried to talk him out of it, but there was simply no other way to gain access fast enough. Besides, he'd already been witnessed. Aboard the Trafalgar, Admiral Ross watched the blue sphere tighten around the shrinking red ball. Compared to the enemies, her butcher's bull was light. However, she'd have preferred to spend only enemies on the butcher than her own men. She was selfish that way. It would be some hours yet until the enemy was entirely defeated, but she could spare a few squadrons to assist the Romans. They performed admirably. Defense was never their best posture, but they knew the work, and with little assistance they could finally focus on the attack. She would have to send them some sort of appropriate trophy as a token of appreciation for their valor. It doesn't do to treat such a touchy allies with all stick and no carrot, after all. The superweapon had suddenly gone cold and moved itself into a parking orbit around the outermost gas giant of the system. Nice and out of the way. The Digitan boarders must have convinced it to allow the Star Sailors to dock with all of the ships in turns to offload its unwelcome guests. She idly wondered what would become of the poor thing after the war. So far as she understood, without any of its creators to physically link to, it was essentially lobotomized. In all likelihood, it would return to wherever it had been slumbering and go back to sleep. The Republic would have to guard its rest, mainly to keep idiots from waking it up and getting themselves killed. For all intents and purposes, she had secured void supremacy. She was looking forward to a drink with Nelson. That pleasure would be tinged with a long list of names that would have to be toasted first. Additionally, every vessel that was not currently pounding on the remains of Exarch fleets was engaged in further R&I drop operations. She allowed herself a small smile about how annoyed her brother was going to be if the R&I achieved victory on the ground before he got his happy army arse thirst side. "Inform the speaking softly. The void supremacy has been achieved," she ordered. "Cleared to enter system." End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.